Hello, and welcome back to our series on CAPS. Now, at the end of our last video, I said we were going to go into time allocation, and that is true, but in actual fact, most of what we will be going over in this video is in fact the skills that are taught in English. So we know that we are supposed to be doing 4.5 hours per week, and that we have divided the teaching and learning cycle into 2-week cycles. But we do not have to adhere rigidly to this cycle, but we must ensure that the language skills, especially reading and writing, are practiced often. So the reality is that you are not going to divide this up every single week perfectly. What this is this is a guideline. 45% of your time should be spent on reading and viewing. So that's comprehension and literature. 45% of your time should be spent on writing and presenting, and 10% of your time should be spent on listening and speaking. Now, right before matric orals, you are obviously going to want to spend more than 1 hour a week on preparing them for their orals. So, it is a guideline rather than a prescription. So this is what learners should have for learning English. And now we go on to the very important part, the content of learning. Sorry, the content of language skills. So this first section is an overview of the language skills. So first we have listening and speaking. We go through the listening process, which we've spoken about before. So the listening process starts with pre-listening. So you set it in context, generate interest, activate vocabulary, predict content, etc., etc. Then during the listening, these are the activities you might want to use to make sure that you are teaching the skill fully. And then at the end, this is what the post-listening activities should encompass. So the reason why we specify this listening process is to give you a guideline on how to go about teaching listening. Because it's one thing to say, well, you must teach listening, but what does it actually mean to be able to teach listening? This is the process that you will go through. The different kinds of listening. So these are, you need to design activities to make sure that you are teaching and assessing the different kinds of listening, which carries on here. And then listening for critical analysis and evaluation. So this is obviously the higher order skills. And then listening for appreciation and interaction. So when we talk about the listening skills, what this CAPS document does is it sets out how to go about teaching the process of listening, what skills you need to acquire in your listening lessons, what types of listening you need to be teaching the different learners, and it specifies what you need to be teaching during those specific listening lessons. So for listening for interaction, you need to teach response to language, gestures, eye contact, and body language. The learners need to show an understanding of the relationship between language and culture by showing respect for cultural conventions. So when you are designing your listening activities, you want to go back to the CAPS document and just have a look through this section so that you can check that your lesson actually is designed with a purpose. So you're not just designing something just for the sake of it. Then we go through speaking, so the speaking process, planning, research and organizing, practicing and presenting, and the skills that you need to take the learners through there. Then features and conventions of oral communication. So we have the prepared speech, the unprepared speech, the interview, introducing a speaker, offering a vote of thanks, panel discussion, informal discussion or conversation, debate, and it takes us through the debate procedures. Okay, and then it gives us the prescribed length for listening for comprehension and the suggested duration for the different texts for grade 10 to 12. Now, once again, these are not cast in stone. So when you are teaching a grade 12 lesson, you're doing a listening comprehension and it's 500 words, it's not the end of the world. But if you are doing a 600-word listening comprehension in grade 10, you can see that's a problem because the length should be around 200 words. So it gives us the guidelines there. Then we go on to reading and viewing. So the reading process, pre-reading, reading, post-reading. So what skills you are doing and what you're assessing over there. Then the interpretations of visual texts. So what we need to be looking at, persuasive techniques, how language and images reflect and shape values and attitudes, impact of use of fonts and size, headings and captions, analyze, interpret, evaluate, and respond to a range of cartoons, comic strips. Also, vocabulary development and language usage, very important skills during the reading phase. And then, of course, we also have sentence structures and the organization of text. So once again, this looks like grammar, and it is, but we are teaching it very specifically within the context of reading. So we are teaching them how to identify these structures and the organization of text, and then we need to teach them how to transfer this from their reading to their writing. And then we want to teach them the features of the literary text, what we need to teach them when we are teaching them to read poetry, what we need to teach them when we are teaching them to read drama, and what we need to look at when we are teaching novels and short stories. And then film study, this is for enrichment. So it's not actually assessed in the NCS, but it is important, especially for those learners that require a bit of extension, a bit more work. This is very important for them. Then we have the suggested literary texts. So once again, these aren't completely prescriptive, but they are texts that you can use in order to teach. This is what the government recommends, and this is the recommendation of the length of the text. And then we have writing and presenting. So this goes through the process of writing, just like with reading and listening, there's a process. So what you need to do on the planning or pre-writing, the drafting, what you need to do in the revising, editing, proofreading, and then language structures and conventions. We are looking specifically at register, style, and voice. We are looking specifically at word choice. And then we are looking at sentence construction and finally at paragraph writing. Sorry, not finally. Finally at punctuation and spelling. And then, of course, the features and formats of different texts. So we teach narrative essays, descriptive essays, and it goes through what these are. And then we have argumentative, discursive, and reflective essays, as well as literary essays. Now, you might have heard about transactional writing. Transactional writing is the sort of writing that you do when you are writing for a specific purpose. So the transactional texts that we teach and that are assessed can be or can seem to be a bit outdated, but at the end of the day, the most important thing is the skill of writing these. So you want to teach them how to write a formal letter. You need to teach them how to write a friendly or informal letter, agenda of a meeting. We need to teach them minutes, and that is how you teach them minutes, speech, dialogue, interview. We also teach them reports, reviews, newspaper articles, magazine article. We teach them the CV, the obituary, and this is, of course, the prescribed or the suggested length. Finally, we have language structures and conventions. So by this phase, learners should be familiar with the basics of grammar, parts of speech, rules of concord, use of tense, auxiliaries and modals, and sentence structures. Okay, so according to CAPS, discrete isolated lessons of language structures should not now be a part of the teaching time. Language structures now become a means to an end in these two main areas. So the exploration, analysis, and examination of texts, and it becomes preemptively useful in their own writing. Now, would that were the reality? Unfortunately, what happens a lot of the time is by the time they get to FET, they don't actually have a great understanding or grasp of grammar. And sometimes we do have to make time to actually teach grammar and to teach things that they should know. So every class is going to be different. Every year is going to be different. Just do be aware when you go into the classroom that it is possible that you are not going to have a situation where they know the basics of grammar and language, and that this actually does need to be taught. But when you are doing that, you still need to remember it's very important that you are bringing in language structures and conventions, so grammar, into every other aspect of English. The more you bring it in, the more they will learn. And essentially, once they've got the basics, what we are trying to do now is to bring them the exploration, analysis, and examination of text and how to use grammar in their own writing. In our next session, we will go over the teaching plans, and that is this part over here, which is a lot less daunting than it first seems, I do promise.